On today's episode, I'll be talking about the 1993 film Falling Down.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always leaves a chance to hold hands for romance. Are you looking for the Luke with an old man, a cold hands? It's a creature of the night who heads for his spotlight. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. Yeah.
All right, everyone, welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies in weekly episodes, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe, and maybe drop me a nice rating on your app of choice. Like I said, today's movie is Falling Down, released on February 26th, 1993, with a runtime of 113 minutes. This movie is rated R for increasingly realistic portrayals of disgruntled white males by the Motion Picture Association of America. Budget, $25 million. Directed by Joel Schumacher, who also directed Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, two movies that I credit with killing the Batman franchise until Christopher Nolan revived it nearly a decade later. But his movies, I mean, they're not without their watchability. It's just they're terrible, awful, campy, over-the-top, stupid movies for modern Batman, I guess. He also directed A Time to Kill, which is a very solid courtroom drama. I think that's the one. It's one with Matthew McConaughey and I think Sandra Bullock and Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson is accused of murdering someone who was accused of raping his daughter, and it's a very heavy movie, but it's a very well-made, great movie. Honestly, I love it. And he also directed a movie called Phone Booth, which is kind of a forgotten film, in my opinion. Like, it's got Colin Farrell in it, and it was basically like the whole movie, I think almost the whole movie is set in a phone booth, and it is Colin Farrell, and he's on the phone with this madman, and he can't leave the phone booth, or whatever god awful terrorist type thing will happen. But it's just funny because the movie was made after phone booths were already like not much of a thing anymore, or they were already starting to be phased out because of cell phones gaining popularity. And it's just weird to me to think that they made that movie as late in the game as they did for phone booths. For the writer, we have Ebb Rose Smith. Didn't really see many other credits for Smith on IMDb that were worth mentioning. For the composer, we have James Newton Howard, who is a powerhouse composer, and he composed the score for the Jack Black King Kong movie, the remake. And I never saw the remake. I love the original from, I think it was the 30s when that came out, and it's just a really cool movie, even given that it's such an old movie that the effects look really bad by today's standards. It's still a very good movie. He did the music for The Village, which is an M. Night Shyamalan movie, and honestly, never saw that one either. It wasn't very good. And he did the music for The Fugitive, which one of my all-time favorite movies, honestly. Harrison Ford is brilliant in it, so is Tommy Lee Jones. For the cast, we have Michael Douglas, who plays William Foster, or Defense, as he's sometimes known in this movie. And actually, I believe that's how he's credited in the end credits. He was also in a movie called Romancing the Stone, which I probably will cover someday on this podcast because it's a pretty good one. It's a bit of a I don't know if I'd call it like an Indiana Jones knockoff, but it was definitely birthed from the popularity of Indiana Jones, in my opinion. But it's a really good time. He was in a movie called Wall Street, which is a mid 80s movie with him and Charlie Sheen, and they're like Wall Street stock guys, and they're obsessed with work, and everything in their lives kind of goes off the rails because they're so fucking obsessed with getting rich and having all of this wealth and stuff. And he was also in a movie called Basic Instinct, which I previously covered on this podcast in my first season. And I love Basic Instinct. And honestly, Sharon Stone is a total chef's kiss in that movie. Just great performance, very attractive, top notch. Next up in the cast, we have the late, great Robert Duvall. He just passed within the last year, I believe. I mean, he was quite a ways up there age wise. He plays Detective Martin Prendergast, and he was, of course, in the movie Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola. That was just, I've said this before, I don't want to get into it too much. I don't care for Apocalypse Now. I think it's not a great movie, or at least not for my taste. I don't really care for it. I know a lot of people think it's one of the all-time great movies, but I just don't, I'm not there. I can't get there with that. He was in both The Godfather Part 1 and 2, and I really enjoy those two movies. I go back and forth about which one is the better movie, because the second one, I think I would say the first one is a better movie. And I only say that because I only like the Vito Corleone half of Godfather Part 2 as much. Like, it's the Vito Corleone origin story in that movie that is like in tandem with what is supposed to be like the more modern day, or the, you know, the closer to the present day story in that movie, is it's just so much better. And he was also in Days of Thunder, which is basically just Top Gun with NASCAR instead of Navy fighter jets. And honestly, it's even got Tom Cruise in it. It's just Top Gun with NASCAR. That's all it is. It's not a bad movie necessarily, but it is very much that, and it feels kind of shitty for that reason. Barbara Hershey plays Beth, and she was in the movie Black Swan with Natalie Portman and Mila Kunis, and I only saw that once. It wasn't really my kind of movie. I don't really know. I mean, there were scenes where, I mean, honestly, I'm a male of the age I am, and I'm attracted to Mila Kunis and Natalie Portman, so there were some scenes in there that I really enjoyed for those reasons, but those are mostly sleazebag reasons. She was also in Hannah and Her Sisters, which I don't even know what that is, and she was in Insidious, a more recent horror movie, so I don't think she's been in a ton of stuff that at least that I've seen. And last but not least, we have Rachel Ticotin. I didn't look up how to pronounce her name, so I apologize if it's wrong. She plays Sandra, who is a detective, and she was in the movie Con Air with Nicolas Cage, John Malkovich, and John Cusack. Love Con Air for its ridiculousness. It's highly enjoyable to watch, even though it is insanely stupid. She was also in, I think, the original Total Recall, but I don't remember what part she plays in it, and I probably should have put what year it was from, but, you know, I'm pretty sure it was the original Total Recall. But that one's a good one. They remade it in the 2000s, and it had Colin Farrell as the lead, and as far as I know, it was not as good. Even though a lot of good people were in it, I don't think it was supposed to be worth checking out. And last but not least for her, she was in Man on Fire, and that one was a solid movie. I really enjoy it. It's like a total revenge flick, and Denzel Washington plays this like total fucking psychopath bodyguard guy, and yeah, it's fucking amazing. It's a really good movie. For casting notes, Foster's signature haircut was the idea of Joel Schumacher and the movie's hairstylist Linda Gorsuch. Douglas commented on how it helped him get into the character of a veteran of the military or defense industry. It gave me the feeling of the late 50s and early 60s, and somehow my character, you kind of have the feeling that he came from another time, or he wished or he hoped for another time when things made sense. Douglas would add concerning the character, there's a lot of people who are a paycheck away from being on the streets and being out of work, who did everything right, they've been responsible, they tried hard, and they don't know what went wrong. We won the war. Where's it all at? That's a lot of casting notes. I don't remember. I wrote, like, what I'll do is when I think of a movie that I know I want to cover, I have a template for my script for these episodes, and I will will go through and fill it out with the pertinent info, with the exception of like my notes for while I'm watching the movie. And I'll fill all that stuff in so it's like already ready to go. And sometimes I fill these things out and I forget what I put because it was a while ago. For the plot synopsis, an ordinary man reaches his breaking point and starts lashing out against the various flaws he sees in society, and his escalating rampage gets noticed and a detective tries to track him down. Well, that's a little lengthy, Brandon. I would have probably made that a little more succinct, but okay. For the tagline, the adventures of an ordinary man at war with the everyday world. And that's a pretty solid one. I actually kind of like that one. All right, guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So, I actually only watched this movie for the first time after I saw an episode of the VH1 show I Love the 90s, where they talked about it, because this movie was pretty shocking when it came out. The film was released during a very tense time in Los Angeles. It hit theaters less than a year after the 92 LA riots. The real world tension heavily influenced how audiences perceived Bill's vigilante journey through the city. But it kicks off in Los Angeles, California, and we're just kind of seeing an extreme close up of the face of a man named William Foster, but I will be calling him Bill, and he is our lead character. He seems very stressed out and sweaty, and he's wearing a pair of glasses that look like something from probably like the 1950s, or at least that's what I'm used to seeing them in. This style of glasses looks like something every male newscaster would wear during that decade when you see old footage or watch old movies. They're known as browline glasses. They were incredibly popular in that era, the 50s and 60s, worn by figures like Malcolm X and KFC's Colonel Sanders. By 93, wearing them was a visual shorthand to show that Bill is stuck in the past and out of touch with modern society. It just seems like Bill is really worked up about something as he's sitting here in this traffic jam, but we really don't know what's going on with him quite yet. It appears that he's just in standstill traffic. It's not just like slow moving traffic, it's like they're legitimately stopped cold for something and it's bumper to bumper. And I don't remember the choreography, or I should say like the cinematography being this cool, but the camera pans around to the different people sitting in their vehicles in this traffic jam to just kind of see who's surrounding him in this moment. And it seems like every sound is muted, almost like you're hearing it through a person's ears who just can't hear very well or something. Or like when your ears get plugged for some reason, it's just like a little muffled. This technique is called sensory overload editing. The director, Joel Schumacher, used extreme close ups of mouths, flies, and ticking clocks combined with heightened diegetic sounds, like noises within the film's world, to simulate a burgeoning panic attack. Oh, and Bill's haircut is fucking terrible and very 50s-esque as well, and he's just kind of looking around at the people surrounding him. And that specific haircut is a flat top or a crew cut. In the context of 1993, it signaled a rigid military industrial complex background, the look of a lot of men who followed the rules of the Cold War era and now find that these rules don't apply. We see a lot of signs and road work going on and bumper stickers that say things like, "How's my driving? Call 1-800-EAT-SHIT," which, trust me, people in the 90s fucking loved that bumper sticker. They thought it was hilarious. Based on the music, it seems as though Bill is reaching a critical level of irritation with the world around him, and he begins swatting away at a fly inside his car with an increasingly frantic demeanor, showing his severe annoyance and just that he's getting a lot of pent up rage. And finally, Bill just opens his driver's side door and gets out of his car and walks back and forth beside it for a little bit. And someone behind him sticks their head out of their window and asks him where he thinks he's going. And he says he's going home. And he just runs away from the scene, leaving his car stuck there in the traffic jam, just in the middle of the fucking road. By the way, abandoning a car in the middle of a highway is actually a serious crime called endangerment and obstruction of a roadway. But in the film, it serves as the ultimate metaphor for Bill resigning from society entirely. Robert Duvall's character, Detective Martin Prendergast, happens to be in his vehicle, not too far behind where Bill just walked away. Like he wasn't a part of the interaction or anything. And a uniformed police officer rides up on a motorcycle between the vehicles, and the person who is behind Bill explains to him that Bill just walked away and left his car there. And I want to be clear, nobody in this movie calls Robert Duvall's character anything but Prendergast, but because that name is a bit much for me to handle, I'll be referring to him as Martin because my dictation software can understand that much better. Actually, I want to clarify. Martin's wife does call him Martin, I believe. Martin approaches the two men, the officer and the other driver, and asks the officer if he needs any help without identifying himself initially. And the officer asks him if it's his vehicle, and the driver explains that it wasn't him and it was just some guy that walked off into the bushes near the overpass and said he was going home. The officer says he'll call a tow truck for the abandoned vehicle, but Martin suggests that he just push the car off to the side of the road for now to allow the traffic to move once it picks up, even though it's pretty clear that the traffic isn't going to start anytime soon. And this is still a good idea because honestly, don't put it off, especially you've got time now to do this. The officer suggests that there's too much moving glass and metal going on in the area to do that, but Martin flashes his badge and insists that they just move it off the road. And I'm just positive that this cop would totally love to see Martin flashing his badge like this, like he has some authority over him for some reason because he's also a cop. It's like, dude, you don't fucking like outrank him really. Like you're a detective. You're not anyway. And it's just kind of hilarious because this officer is basically just looking for an excuse to not do this. And his excuse would be valid if traffic was moving at full speed, but it's not. It's like I said, standstill. Martin looks down as he begins to help pushing the vehicle and notices that the license plate says defense on it, but it's spelled out D-FENS. Personalized or vanity plates are issued by the DMV for an extra fee. In California, you can have up to 7 characters. D-FENS is a triple meaning. It refers to a few different things that we'll learn about later, and I'll talk about it again. But basically, it's just something to be remembered in this moment. Martin tells the uniformed officer that he's lucky he caught him today because it's his last day as a cop, and the officer basically just rolls his eyes and says, "Yeah, lucky me." And there's this really wonky moment as they get out of the vehicle, or they get the vehicle off the side of the road, off to the side of the road, my God, where the officer's motorcycle just falls over and Martin attempts to like pick it back up again, but the officer just like yells at him and insists that he not do that. And it's just very weird as a moment, and the acting is pretty terrible and feels off, even by Robert Duvall, who is a pretty good actor. I'm sorry, rest in peace, Robert Duvall. But Martin just walks back to his car instead of dealing with this officer anymore. It cuts to a woman walking home with her child and dog, and she can hear the phone ringing inside her house, and she answers it just in time before it goes to the machine. The woman's character is named Beth, and she's portrayed by Barbara Hershey, and her character's name is Adele, or her daughter's name is Adele, I'm sorry. But when Beth gets inside and picks up, no one says anything, and we can see that it's actually Bill calling from a payphone near where he just walked off the highway from, but he's too anxious to say anything in this moment. The use of payphones in this movie is a major plot device that wouldn't work today because in 1993, payphones were ubiquitous in LA, and because they were anonymous and untraceable in real time without a trap, they allowed Bill to stalk Beth while staying mobile. She eventually gives up and hangs up on him, and so he hangs up too. After a few moments of hesitation, he considers calling her again, but he doesn't actually have enough change to do that because it's a payphone. You had to pay actual money in change, and there was no digital way that you could like run a card at that time. Like nothing had that option. Everything was cash for the most part, except for like in-store transactions. He walks inside a nearby convenience store and asks for some change for the payphone from the cashier, and the man behind the counter says, "No change. Have to buy something." Bill angrily sets his briefcase down on the counter and goes over to a cooler and pulls out a can of Coke and begins holding it to his face to cool himself off. He brings it back to the counter, and the Asian man tells him it's 85 cents in unclear broken English, and Bill has to clarify what he's saying. Like he's just like, what was that? But once he hears the price he's charging for the drink, he points out to him that if he pays that, he won't have enough change from paying for that to make the call. So he tries to basically haggle with the guy and tell him he'll give him 50 cents for the drink. And that way he can have 50 cents change, but the man refuses this. Bill points out that the guy is mispronouncing the word five because he's saying it as fi, and he says that there's a V at the end of it. And of course, Bill is being that guy right now. And he asks him if there aren't any V's in China, and the guy corrects him and says that he's Korean and not Chinese. This scene highlights the LA melting pot tensions of the era. Following the 92 riots, there was a significant publicized friction between the Korean American business community and other residents in LA, which the movie leans into heavily here. But Bill is already annoyed and says that the guy comes to his country and doesn't have the decency to learn their language. And initially Bill goes to leave, and then he stops for a second and turns back around and says, "You're Korean, right? Do you have any idea how much money my country has given your country?" But when the guy asks him how much, in annoyance, Bill admits that he doesn't actually know, but he says it's probably a lot. But Bill's likely referring to the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 and the military aid given to South Korea following the Korean War. Between 1946 and 1976, the U.S. provided about $12.6 billion in economic and military aid to South Korea. The man tells Bill to go, but he says he will stay, and the man pulls a baseball bat from behind the counter, and this leads to the two of them having this struggle, this physical altercation with each other, and the two of them knock over a display case from the counter and end up wrestling to the floor. Bill manages to get the bat away from him, and the man just tells him to take his money, and Bill asks him again to speak clearly because he can't understand him. And then when he realizes the guy thinks that he's robbing him, he gets irritated that the guy actually believes that he's trying to do that. And even though that's totally the vibe here, that's exactly what anybody would probably think. He explains that he's not a thief, and he says that he thinks that the cashier is a thief because he's charging 85 cents for a damn soda. Bill proclaims that he's rolling back prices to 1965 and proceeds to go around the store and asks how much everything costs and smashes it all with the bat whenever he thinks that the cost that the clerk says is too much. And by the way, spoiler alert, he thinks everything costs too much. He convinces the guy to sell him the Coke for 50 cents and puts his dollar in the cash register and then takes his own change as the guy continues laying there. For context, in 1965, a 12-ounce can of soda typically cost around 10 cents. Bill's rollback to 50 cents isn't even accurate to 65. He's just picking a number that feels fair to him in the moment, showing his internal logic is starting to fail. All the while, the guy is still lying on the ground and terrified, not understanding why everything that's happening is happening. Back at police headquarters, for Martin's last day, his coworkers filled his desk drawer with sand as a prank, and they all give him a bunch of crap and mention some guy named Forsyth who very unluckily was killed on his last day. And it's hilarious to me because this is a cliche in a lot of cop stories where it's the cop's last day, and it always dials up the tragedy because something terrible happens to him before he can retire. I'm reminded of the various McBain clips that appear in the early seasons of The Simpsons with fictional actor Rainier Wolfcastle, who's a parody of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it's during these McBain clips, one of the cliches plays out in this particularly gory sequence where the partner's last day, it's he's at this diner or whatever, and there's a big shootout and he dies. And McBain cries out, "Mendoza!" This trope is often called retirement death or one day to retirement, and it's a subtype of the fatal flaw where a character's vulnerability is highest right before they reach safety. The Simpsons parodying it shows how overused the concept was by the early 90s and just how cliche it had become by then. But anyway, all the coworkers joke with him because he works at a desk, and they sarcastically point out how dangerous his final shift at work will be sitting there. Martin's partner Sandra comes up and apologizes to him and says that she tried to dissuade the others from pulling the prank, and it's well, I would hope that you'd try and convince them to do a less lame prank, but that's just me. But Martin says that it's seemingly obligatory for his last day, and he asks her what's going on that day, and she just says nothing and asks if they're still on for lunch because she wants to make sure he's not going home early that day, and he assures her that he's not superstitious, so he's not intending to do anything to get out of working a full last day. Martin pulls what I assume is a picture of either his daughter or granddaughter from the drawer full of sand and looks at it for a moment, and it's clearly like something he's sad about. Back at Beth's house, she is clearly planning some kind of birthday party for her daughter Adele, and she's talking to one of her friends about it on the phone. And we see that Bill is attempting to call her again, but he gets a busy signal and then he hangs up the payphone and walks away. But we see two guys who appear to be Hispanic that seem to be going after him. And I guess we're supposed to assume that they might be gang members based on what they're wearing. The costume design here uses the Chicano style white undershirts, oversized flannels, and bandanas, which was the stereotypical Hollywood shorthand for LA gang members in the early 90s. Martin's wife calls him and she seems out of sorts and tells him she wants him to come home, and he asks her what's wrong. Martin's wife, Amanda Prendergast, is played by actress Tuesday Weld, whose real name is Susan Kerweld, which is only slightly less ridiculous than Tuesday, but I've never heard of her before, even though she's been in things that I've seen. Tuesday Weld was a pretty big star in the 60s, known for being a blonde bombshell type in movies like Lord Love a Duck. I don't even know if that's the right name. I might have miscopied that. Casting her as an aging, anxious wife was a meta commentary on the fading of Hollywood glamour, but she explains to Martin that she was wrapping some things up at home and she got really scared, and she nervously asks him if he's making their move just for her or if he's doing it because he really wants to. And he explains to her that what's important is that the two of them are together, and then she forces him to say that he'll be home soon and that he loves her. But she's honestly just a frantic mess throughout this whole conversation. It seems as though this is pretty common for her and he's like used to it, and he doesn't seem to think much of it. He then pulls out a snow globe and winds it, and it plays the song London Bridge is Falling Down. I don't know if that's actually the name. Maybe it's My Fair Lady or something. And the two of them sing the song together. London Bridge is Falling Down is a traditional English nursery rhyme and singing game about the repeated destruction and rebuilding of the London Bridge over the course of many years. The song acts as a motif for the film's title and theme. Some historians believe the lyrics refer to immurement, the ancient practice of walling someone up alive to ensure a bridge's stability, which mirrors how Martin and Bill feel trapped by their lives. Singing with Martin seems to cheer Amanda up enough and bring her out of her frantic state, and the two of them finally end the conversation on more peaceful terms than it seemed like it was going to. Then he looks down again at the picture of the little girl that he took out of his desk, but we don't know who the fuck it's supposed to be yet. Back with Bill, he's sitting on a slab of concrete in this like open area. It looks like it would be a park if it wasn't so shitty. And he's looking through a hole in his shoe that he took off for some reason. I'm guessing just to look at the hole. He takes a folded up piece of newspaper and stuffs it in his shoe to cover the hole. And suddenly the two Hispanic gang members come up to him and confront him, and they tell him that he's trespassing and loitering on private property. But Bill just tells them that he didn't see any signs. But one of them points at some graffiti on the cement slab and proclaims that it's a sign and it means that there's no fucking trespassing. And Bill jokingly asks if it really says all of that in this like fucking shitty little graffiti art, and they get irritated with him for not being serious. And Bill tries to course correct by saying that he thinks they got off on the wrong foot and that he realizes this is some sort of gangland thing. In LA gang culture, graffiti or tagging is used as a place marker, for delineating territory between rival gangs. For the gang members, the graffiti is a legally binding sign in their world, which Bill mocks. He explains that he respects their turf and that he wouldn't want them on his turf either, and says that if they'll take a step or two back, he'll just be on his way and get the fuck out of there. But they stop him and tell them that they think he should have to pay a toll for the transgression. And he tells them that he's had a pretty rare morning and he's not in the mood for this, but they insist that they take his briefcase as the toll. But he tells them that he won't give it to them, but one of the two of them pulls out a butterfly knife and insists that he give it to them. A butterfly knife, or a balisong, originates from the Philippines. It became a popular movie villain weapon because of the intimidating flipping motion required to open it, although it's actually less practical in a fight than a standard folding knife. Bill points out he was willing to mind his own business and respect their territory and treat them like men, but he says that they just couldn't leave it alone. He angrily declares that he will give them their briefcase if that's what they want, and goes and grabs it and pulls out the bat from the convenience store. Then he proceeds to hit one of them with the briefcase and hit the other one with the bat. The two of them end up fleeing in terror, and Bill starts yelling out that he's going home, and he picks up the butterfly knife and puts it in his pocket. Back with Martin at the station, an officer comes to take his gun from him, with it being his last day. A guy named Detective Brian comes up and asks Martin to take a statement from a man named Mr. Lee, and it's the Korean guy from the convenience store. Mr. Lee is ranting in Korean, and Brian tells him he'll have to speak English, but the detective explains to Martin that his market was hit less than an hour before he came in. Martin asks Lee for a description of the man who robbed his store, but Lee clarifies that he didn't rob his store and that the guy attacked him. He explains that he took a soda that he paid for and then left after attacking him. So Brian apologizes to Martin and explains to Mr. Lee that they have to go see someone else now because he thought that he was robbed, but he was actually assaulted, and that would be something someone else deals with. This reflects the bureaucratic nature of police work. Robbery involves taking property by force, while assault is the physical attack. Because Bill paid for the soda, mostly, it becomes a complicated legal gray area for the report. But before Mr. Lee walks away, he explains to Martin that the man stole his baseball bat, and he makes a really weird reference to the word defense. But that sentiment is kind of meaningless even to Martin, who saw Bill's license plate earlier in the morning. He's not putting that together that easily. The two Hispanic guys are seen riding around in a car after getting chased away by Bill, and one of their girlfriends thinks that they should go to the hospital, but they're intent on locating Bill again and getting their revenge. Back at Beth's house, her phone rings again, and when she answers, no one says anything. But then, now that no one is around, she asks the caller to cut the crap because she knows who it is. Bill reveals that it is indeed him, and he says that it's Adele's birthday and he wanted to tell her that he's just coming home for it. And Beth asks him what he's talking about because there's no way he's coming there, and it seems pretty clear that they're like ex-spouses, and Adele is their daughter that they had together. He says that Adele is his daughter and that he wants to see her, and she says that it's her house now and she pays the rent. She points out that he doesn't even pay child support and he can't just walk in and do stuff like this anytime he feels like it. He tells her not to talk like that, and he says that he has to come home because he has to bring her present, but she tells him that he can't come there. Suddenly the gang members see Bill talking on the payphone, and it's just like outside of a building, like a business or something, as he asks Beth how Adele's doing, and she says that she's doing just fine without him. And of course, this is all about as angry as Bill could be, and these gang members are about to approach him. The girlfriend tries pleading with them to not do anything because it's broad daylight, and they kick her out of the car and they pull out their guns and they kind of gear up for a drive-by. The weapon of choice for the drive-by is a MAC-10 or Uzi submachine gun. These became notorious in the 80s and 90s because they're compact and have a very high cyclic rate of fire, meaning that they spray many bullets very quickly, making them dangerous but highly inaccurate. Just as Bill gets more insistent with Beth that he's coming home and she insists that he's not, the gang members do the drive-by and they hit multiple stores with their bullets. They also take out multiple people, but Bill is practically unfazed and equally unharmed. As the gang drives away, they cause other vehicles to crash, and it seems as though Bill hasn't even really reacted and just grabs his briefcase off the top of the payphone and walks away. He keeps walking and finds that the gang did collide with a parked car around the corner and is in really bad shape, and he just looks at them in disgust as they lay in pools of blood on the pavement. He walks up to one of them and says that they missed, and he grabs their Uzi and fires a single shot and says he missed too. but he fires another shot into the injured man's leg and takes his bag full of guns and walks away. So Bill takes his guns. Bill's reaction or lack thereof to the shooting is meant to show the total detachment he has from reality. He's no longer afraid of death because he sees, or at least he feels like he has no future. But he also suggests that the guy takes some lessons as the girlfriend rushes up to care for him or whatever. Martin goes to see Captain Yardley, who is played by Raymond J. Barry, and is hitting a punching bag in his office. They talk about the drive-by shooting that just occurred. And by the way, if you don't know who Raymond J. Barry is, he's the guy who plays the dad in Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, who keeps telling Dewey that the wrong kid died. Yardley points out that Martin is retiring a little early and won't be getting a full pension, but Martin was fully aware of that, and he was planning to retire anyway. Police pensions are typically calculated based on years of service. By retiring early, Martin is likely sacrificing a significant percentage of his monthly income for the rest of his life, which underscores how desperate he is to get his wife away from LA. But Yardley wants to make sure it wasn't because he was wounded, and he mentions that now that he's behind a desk, there's not much of a chance of him getting wounded again. He tells Martin they make him give this speech. They make the captain tell people that are trying to retire to try and talk them out of it or whatever. So he says it's not too late to change his mind because he would hate to lose a good cop, but Martin doesn't really cave to this pressure at all. Yardley asks how Martin's kids are, but Martin clarifies that he and his wife don't have any, just as the captain goes to complain about the clerk for not having the form Martin filled out correctly, or the form for Martin filled out correctly. Martin clarifies that they did have a daughter and they lost her, but he doesn't elaborate at this time about what actually happened to her because it's pretty clear that the captain doesn't really give a shit about him and is just humoring him. You would think that would be pretty well known around the station that hey, this guy has a young daughter who died very young, and it was probably pretty devastating for him, so kind of be cool about that. Back with Bill, he passes a crowded bus stop and sees panhandlers and homeless people around. As a bus arrives, it seems as though he's attempting to get on it initially, but he gets frustrated by the impolite way people bump into him and don't really pay attention. Then he decides to just not get on and walks over toward a construction area where a man less than politely tells him that he can't just cut through there, and Bill says that he's going through and he's going to go home, but the guy tells him, not this way, you're not. Back at Beth's house, she's talking to a police officer while another officer is outside talking to Adele, and the officer's asking Beth questions about Bill. It's made clear that she has a restraining order against him because he had a habit of showing up unannounced on the wrong day or in the middle of the night. A restraining or protective order is a legal document issued by a judge that requires one person to stay a specific distance away from another. Violating it is a criminal offense that usually results in immediate arrest, though, as Beth notes, it's often just a piece of paper in the face of a violent person. And she says that the problem is he has this horrendous temper, and she was afraid that getting a restraining order would send him over the edge, but the judge insisted that she do it to make an example out of him. But she says he doesn't drink or do drugs or anything like that. She just says he does have a propensity for violence, which confuses the officer because she says that he never struck her or Adele, but she explains that there were times where she thought that he was going to, but she didn't want to wait until he got around to it. And it seems pretty clear that this officer doesn't actually get what she means, even though it seems like he should get what she means. And I don't think it's really actually hard to understand as he's making it seem like it is. It seems like maybe he's just a fucking moron, honestly. If the guy is just legitimately being terrifying and coming around when he's not supposed to and being mean and scary, I don't think it's unfair to suggest that a logical next step in his escalation might be violence. This is a very realistic portrayal of preemptive safety. Law enforcement in the early 90s often struggled with domestic calls where no physical strike had actually happened yet, frequently leaving women in Beth's position with very little actual protection. Bill is now in a park and he's approached by a random guy who is clearly a con artist and gives him some sob story about a friend who owes him money that stood him up, and he says he drove all the way there from Santa Barbara. He asks him if he can spare a couple of dollars to get him home, and he says if Bill gives him his address, he'll mail the money back to him, which is the most notorious scam thing. It's just fucking ask people for money. Don't pretend like you're gonna go to the trouble to mail it back. The guy then, like, Bill asks the guy to see his driver's license, and the guy doesn't understand why he'd want to see his driver's license, but Bill says that it would have his address on it. The guy tells him that he doesn't have a driver's license, and Bill finds it very hard to believe that he would drive all the way there from Santa Barbara without a license, even though that probably happens all the time. The guy starts to get frustrated with him and starts to get more pushy and bullshits even more by saying things that are even less believable. Finally, Bill just tells him that he's not going to give him any money, and the guy pleads with him to at least give him one of his bags because if he sold one of them, he could eat for a week. And Bill admits that he no longer needs his briefcase and gives it to the guy, but when the guy finally manages to open it up, all it has is like a really shitty lunch in it. But Bill has already walked away at this point, and the fact that Bill was carrying only a sandwich and an apple in his briefcase all morning shows that he originally intended to just go to quote unquote work and maintain his routine. Giving this briefcase away signifies him finally letting go of his identity as a working man. The girlfriend from the drive-by is brought into the police station and is interrogated by some of the detectives, and she's explaining how a white guy attacked her and her friends with a baseball bat. Martin overhears this and comes into the interrogation room and asks her what the man who attacked them looked like, and asks if he wore a shirt and tie, and the girl seems shocked that he might actually know who attacked them. But the other detective in the interrogation room basically kicks Martin out because he assumes the girl is just making up a bunch of bullshit, and Martin is just kind of giving her ideas of what she can lie about. Martin comes out to the bullpen and just like flags down Detective Brian again, the Japanese detective that brought Mr. Lee in, and asks him where the convenience store was that was hit, and he begins piecing it together on the map that all of these incidents might have been the same guy, and he could just be walking in a certain direction. We see Bill go to this fast food restaurant, and when he gets to the front counter, he attempts to order breakfast, but the cashier, Sheila, informs him that they're no longer serving breakfast. He frustratedly asks for the manager, but the manager, Rick, says the exact same thing as Sheila. This frustrates Bill because it's only a few minutes past the cutoff time. The fast food restaurant is called Whammy Burger, and it's a fictionalized version of like a McDonald's or a Burger King. In the 90s, the breakfast cutoff was a major point of public contention because menus were physically swapped at a specific time, usually 10:30 or 11, and the kitchen literally stopped cooking eggs at that time. Bill sternly places his bag on the counter, which, if you'll recall, is full of fucking weapons, and asks Rick if he's ever heard the expression, the customer is always right, and Rick frustratedly says yes. But I do want to point out that the complete phrase is, the customer is always right in matters of taste, which is a retail philosophy attributed to Harry Gordon Selfridge or Marshall Field in the early 20th century. It originated to empower customers to make their own choices regarding preferences and style, rather than for them to be able to demand compliance with unreasonable requests. It basically means that the customer's tastes and desires about products or services should be a guiding principle for your business. It does not mean that they should just get whatever they want, no matter how insane what they want is. It's like, basically, you shouldn't try and convince customers what they do want. It should be you trying to meet their needs in some way. Rick explains to Bill that it's their policy that after 11:30, he has to order from the lunch menu if he wants to get food, but Bill insists that he wants breakfast, and Rick tells him that he's really sorry, and Bill says he's really sorry too as he pulls out an Uzi from the bag, and everyone in the restaurant, of course, screams. Bill tells everyone to sit down and remain calm, but as he's yelling at them, he accidentally hits the trigger and fires multiple shots at the ceiling. Bill then apologizes and says the trigger is sensitive and that he didn't actually mean to do that. Open bolt submachine guns like this one that Bill is carrying are notorious for being like twitchy. They can fire if dropped or if the trigger is even slightly brushed, which is why they are extremely dangerous in the hands of an untrained civilian like Bill. But it seems like he starts to realize what a fucking psychopath he looks like and changes his mind and says that he decides he wants to order from the lunch menu. But Rick and Sheila are standing there in terror as Bill gives them his order, and he insists that Rick actually retrieve his order himself because he feels more comfortable with him now after all they've been through. But when they bring Bill his order, he's even more annoyed to see that his burger doesn't look anything like the pictures on the menu, and he tries to ask everyone dining at the restaurant what they think, but it's pretty clear they're all just too terrified to speak. The false advertising of food philosophy or photography is achieved using food stylists. In real life, those burgers on their menu are often undercooked, painted with brown coloring, and sprayed with glycerin to look more juicy, which is why the real product could never match the actual photo. Martin and Sandra are at lunch now, and it's revealed that Martin and his wife are moving to Lake Havasu, which is where the London Bridge is. In 1831, or no, my mistake. Okay, so the 1831 London Bridge was purchased by American developer Robert P. McCulloch in 1968 for $2.46 million, disassembled in London and shipped to Lake Havasu City, Arizona. It was moved because the bridge was sinking into its original location on the River Thames and could not support modern heavy traffic, causing the City of London to sell it. The new structure is a concrete core faced with the original 1830s granite. It was reconstructed on dry land, after which the channel underneath was dredged to turn the peninsula into an island. A common urban legend is that McCulloch thought he was buying the much more famous and ornate Tower Bridge, which is a lot more familiar to look at. Like, it looks like what you would picture if you think of the London Bridge, in my opinion. However, he and the City of London both officially denied this story, stating he knew exactly which bridge he was getting. Sandra and Martin give a very shortened explanation of the moving of the bridge to this waitress who doesn't give a shit. Some might have even called it an abridged explanation. Do you get it? The two of them sit down for their lunch finally, and it's clear that something is weighing on Sandra's mind, and she does that thing where she says that she's not going to reveal what it is because it's none of her business. But honestly, if you've already said enough that you're saying that out loud and being that obvious that something is bothering you, then you no longer have the option to not share what you're thinking about. And it turns out that her issue is that she can't believe Martin is actually planning to move to fucking Lake Havasu after he retires. He claims that he likes it, but Sandra asserts that it's pretty clear it's just because his wife Amanda wants to move there, and it's not exactly something he really seems to want to do. And he gives quite possibly the worst defense of why he wants to move there with his wife. He basically asserts that he's going along with it because his wife used to be very beautiful and could have ended up with anyone, but she chose him. And he basically says that his wife struggles with the fact that her looks were all she ever had, so it's a struggle for her because she's never had another career or talent to fall back on, I guess. And I mean, it makes him sound like a total fucking simp, honestly. But suddenly, their lunch is interrupted by one Detective Lydecker, who is someone I would describe as a big piece of shit with a very punchable face. And he's there to tell them that he's sorry to interrupt, but some guy just held up a fast food restaurant with a machine gun because they wouldn't serve him breakfast, and then he paid for his meal and left. It hasn't been made super clear, but I think Lydecker is Sandra's partner, and she works in a different department than Martin, I suppose, because this is yet another crime that is not technically a robbery that's getting reported, and she clearly seems to be investigating it. But Martin is intrigued by the fact that this incident seems to line up with the other ones that he's heard about that day, and he follows the two of them out of the restaurant to get more information. They can't understand why Martin is so intrigued by what happened, especially with him retiring and whatnot, but he insists that they find out if he was wearing a shirt and tie to see if he was the same guy as the other incidents that he's heard about. And he specifically stops Sandra to tell her that there's one thing else about his wife that he wanted to mention, which is that he loves her very much. but Sandra doesn't seem to be sold on that as a reason for what she was talking to him about. We see Bill walking by some kind of financial institution, and there's a man picketing by himself outside, holding a sign complaining about being denied a loan application because he wasn't economically viable. The not economically viable man is a direct mirror of Bill. He's dressed exactly like Bill with a white t shirt, tie, and glasses. The scene is meant to show that Bill isn't the only one who feels chewed up and spit out by the system. He's just the only one who turned violent because of it. But at the moment, he's really just in the background while Bill is buying this shitty unicorn snow globe for Adele that plays London Bridge is Falling Down for her birthday. And as he's paying for it, the police come and arrest the protester, and Bill watches him as he yells from the back of the police car not to forget him. And you might think, like, the protester wasn't really doing anything to get arrested for, but I think the truth of the matter is that you might actually need like a permit for protesting, like to legally protest on for certain things or in certain ways on certain property. You have to have some kind of permission, which is insane to me. Back at Beth's house, the police tell her that they're going to take off, and they reckon that Bill probably just decided against coming there when he realized how much trouble he could get into for doing that when he's not supposed to, which is honestly just really great police work. And they tell her that she should probably contact her lawyer and have her lawyer contact her ex-husband's lawyer to make this whole thing official. Then we see Bill making a call on another payphone, and some guy gets way too aggressive with him way too quickly about letting him get his turn at the payphone. Like, it seemed like Bill was literally just making a call that no one ever even answered. And so he wasn't even using it very long at all, but the guy unloads on him for not being more considerate, because there are other people that want to use the phone, and Bill should respect that, at least according to this guy. And this is the kind of thing that almost exclusively only ever is going to happen in a movie unless the person is just mentally unwell in real life. Like, no one is going from 0 to 100 like that this quickly. But Bill smugly acknowledges what he says to him and then unloads his machine gun on the payphone and destroys it and the phone booth, rendering the whole thing inoperable. Then Martin's wife calls him at his desk again, and she's carrying on about a bunch of nonsense that no one should ever make a phone call to someone while they're at work for. Like, that one of their pets actually ate. Who gives a shit? But he has to put his wife on hold because Sandra calls him to tell him that the guy at the fast food restaurant did match the shirt and tie description. And for some reason, he makes Sandra hold while she's using the phone at this restaurant so he can get back on the other line with his wife. And then the wife rattles off all these things that she needs him to get at the store. And he says that he can't do that because he might have some kind of send off at work to deal with. And of course, she gets irritated and assumes that that means that they're going to get some kind of stripper or something. Then he switches back to Sandra and tells her that he thinks it might be the same guy who assaulted those gangbangers with the baseball bat. But she says that he didn't use a baseball bat and that he had a gym bag full of guns. And basically the whole time we can see Sandra at this restaurant, Detective Lydecker is constantly coming over to her and complaining about how she's on the phone and she has a million people to get statements from. He switches back to his wife and she basically is doing the annoying thing where she's like, "Oh, well, it's your last day. You might as well just go home now. What are they going to do? Fire you?" And honestly, I get the thought behind that, but that's such a douchebag thing to say. It's about a sense of responsibility and doing the right thing, even if there are likely no repercussions for failing to follow through with something. I mean, in this case, I would say that he might be risking his pension if he just like quits instead of, you know what I mean? Like, instead of officially doing it the way he's supposed to. Like, I wouldn't want it to put them in a position where they could say they fired him or something. Sometimes doing the right thing is not screwing people over because you give a shit about them as human beings more than you do about your fleeting feelings of hitting the door and getting it over with. After getting frustrated with his wife's nonsense, he switches back to Sandra and tells her that if he ends up facing the guy, or she ends up facing the guy that's behind these crimes, she should be very careful. And honestly, this whole switching back and forth with the call waiting, it is only used to make the scene a little more interesting. In reality, what I would have done if I was putting somebody on a call waiting for this is I would have put the wife on hold, because who gives a shit about what she's talking to you about, and you know it's nonsense. Fucking say everything you have to say to Sandra, because you have nothing you need to hear from your wife. You know she has, if she let off with, oh, our animal ate, then you know that she can fucking wait. Bill heads into a military surplus store where some total nut job named Nick, who seemingly owns the place, sees him walk in and he approaches him, and Bill explains to Nick that he's looking for some hiking boots, but it almost immediately appears like Nick is using this for a bit of posturing, like this whole interaction. He explains to Bill that they have these really nice hiking boots, but he thinks that they're for pussies and, I'm going to use an unpleasant word here, so trigger warning. He says it's for pussies and faggots, and he makes eye contact with these two guys nearby in the store that are apparently supposed to be gay. So it's pretty clear that he's just doing this to make those guys feel unwelcome and let them know that he doesn't care for their way of life, or at least what he assumes their way of life to be. But as Nick carries on with more rhetoric and really hammers home his homophobic views, the two men begin to get offended, and one of them asks Nick if he has a problem, but Nick says that they're the ones with the problem, and he even pulls a pistol out on them and tells them that he has the right to refuse service from anyone. This actor playing Nick is Frederick Forrest, and he was famously in Apocalypse Now as Chef. This role was designed to show that while Bill is angry, there is a much darker, organized, and truly hateful version of that anger that is represented here by Nick. And as all of this is happening, Bill spots a police cruiser pulling up across the street. Martin goes back to see the girlfriend of the gang member and pleads with her to admit that they had a bag full of guns with them. I did say that. Martin goes back. Okay. She tries to deny everything initially, but when he tells her that a lot more people could get hurt and he just needs to know if the white guy took the bag of guns, she finally admits that they did have a lot of guns with them. Bill throws on a new pair of boots to replace the shoes with the hole in them, or one of the shoes, but as he's concealed in the dressing room and Nick is just standing there talking to him, Sandra comes in looking for a man who matches Bill's description, but Nick doesn't give Bill up. And because Nick is a class act, he stops Sandra as she is on her way out and asks her why they don't have a female version of the word officer to refer to someone like her, like officeress or something, like actress instead of actor. Bill watches very carefully from behind the curtain of the dressing room as Sandra tells him that a police officer is a police officer and the term isn't gendered for a reason. When she finally leaves, he locks the door behind her and Bill asks him why he did that, and it seems pretty clear that Nick really thinks that the two of them are buddies and he wants to show Bill something. He takes him back into the back room to show him his private stash, including a World War I gas mask. Now, as far as I know, World War I was the first major conflict where chemical warfare was widely utilized and gas masks were required to reduce the hysteria that chemical attacks would induce and allow soldiers to maintain their posts with more regularity. World War I chemical warfare primarily used chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas. The first gas masks were actually just flannel masks soaked in chemicals like urine to neutralize the gas before the more familiar rubber and filter designs were perfected. Nick shows Bill a discarded can originally intended for the storage of lethal chemicals that he believes might have been used to gas people in concentration camps. But of course, he uses much more unpleasant language and seems more enthusiastic and fascinated by the topic than he should be. The chemical Nick is referring to is Zyklon B. It was originally an insecticide used for fumigation, but it was notoriously repurposed by the Nazi regime during the Holocaust in gas chambers at camps like Auschwitz. Bill asks him why he's showing him all of this stuff, and he looks around at all of the paraphernalia, including books on Nazism. And instead of really answering him, Nick just says that Bill can keep that stuff, and he wants to show him something better, which is a heat-seeking bazooka, one that he says can take out a jumbo jet. The weapon is actually an M72 LAW, which is a light anti-tank weapon, which Nick calls a bazooka, but that term is technically for a different World War II era weapon. The M72 is a single shot disposable rocket launcher. It's not heat seeking, and it is an unguided rocket that it shoots. And he says that he wants to give it to Bill because he's heard about him on the radio and he wants to help him out because he naturally just assumes that Bill's crimes have been racially motivated or something. And he says the N word at least a few times in this sequence and explains that the two of them are the same. And let me tell you, I don't understand why this is so common with so fucking many people, where they just seem to think that anyone they identify even slightly with must think exactly like they do in every way. And they talk to them very, very much under the assumption that that's the case, no matter what, without even like double checking. And I gotta respect Bill for very directly and immediately pointing out that the two of them are not the same because he's just an American and he says that Nick is a sick asshole. Now, I might not be as bold as to piss off a guy who has made it very clear that he has no shortage of weapons at his disposal in the immediate proximity, but I guess I'm just a giant pussy for that. Nick asks him what kind of vigilante he is, and Bill proclaims that he's not a vigilante and he's just trying to get home for his daughter's birthday. And for some reason, this is what sets Nick off, and he says, "Fuck you." And Bill just angrily tells him that all he was doing was disagreeing with him and that he has the right to do so in America, but of course, Nick is already pissed off and he's not going to listen to reason anyway because he's an idiot. And of course, Nick angrily pulls a gun on him and forces him to stand over a table while he rifles through his gym bag full of guns. Get it? Rifling through. Ha ha ha. Which I don't want to toot my own horn, but that's a pretty great pun because to rifle through something comes from the Dutch word rifle, meaning to plunder or search, but rifling in guns refers to the spiral grooves inside a barrel that make the bullet spin for accuracy. I said spin weird there, I'm sorry about that. But Nick finds the unicorn snow globe and proclaims that it's gay paraphernalia, and he angrily throws it and smashes it, and Bill cries out in devastation. He might have said gay shit. Did this like autocorrect? Like, because sometimes I plugged it into to Google Gemini to like just edit for clarity because it takes so long if I don't. And if it fucking changed it from gay shit to gay paraphernalia, I'm gonna be fucking pissed. Anyway, and then Nick tells him he's going to turn him in and throws a handcuff on his wrist and says that he's going to get him thrown in jail where he's going to get fucked in the ass. But as he tries to cuff Bill's other hand, he knocks Bill to the ground and angrily whispers more unpleasant nonsense in his ear, and Bill pulls out the butterfly knife that he got from the gangbanger and sticks him in the shoulder, and Nick almost immediately pulls the knife out of his shoulder, which, by the way, I believe is a super bad idea in a lot of cases because of the potential for blood loss. Because if you're stabbed, the object actually acts as a plug for the wound, like whatever you were stabbed with. Removing it causes the blood pressure to drop significantly and internal bleeding accelerates. Medical professionals always recommend leaving the object in until you're in an operating room and they can remove it safely. Bill ultimately picks up Nick's pistol and shoots him multiple times with it, marking a major turning point where he's actually killed someone deliberately and unnecessarily, because honestly, he could have just fucking walked out of this place and maybe even just shot Nick in the leg or something to keep him down. Back at the station, Martin is trying to tell Captain Yardley about the situation, and all of the other detectives give him a bunch of shit for sticking his nose in their case. And ultimately, the captain mocks Martin for his seemingly outlandish theories, and as the the other detectives laugh, he sends them away. Then he decides to have a very unpleasant moment with Martin where he explains to him that although he gave him this speech earlier, it really was only because he had to, and he reveals that he's never actually liked Martin, mostly because he doesn't swear and he seems afraid to hit the street and would rather sit behind a desk. But Martin clarifies that he's not afraid to hit anything. Then, when he gets back to his desk, Sandra tells him about the shooting at the phone booth, and it seems like the case is all adding up the way that Martin thought it would. But she can tell he's upset about something, and he reveals that the captain said this thing that he did to him about being a coward, and Sandra tells him that it's his own fault because he let everyone believe he was afraid to stay on the streets, and she knows now that it was his wife who made him get behind the desk. But he explains to her that it was actually his own decision because one night he came home and his wife had convinced herself that he had been killed and he was actually a ghost coming to attack her. And all I can think is, oh, so she's like a total fucking lunatic moron now. And now you're somehow using this to defend yourself and her, like it doesn't make both of you idiots. This behavior is often a symptom of secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. Spouses of first responders often develop severe anxiety disorders based on the constant fear of their partner not coming home, which is what the film is trying to portray with Amanda and like why she freaks out so much. Back at Beth's house, Bill calls her from the back room at the military surplus store, and she picks up and he asks her who she was talking to earlier when he called and got a busy signal. She tells him that he's just trying to scare her, and he asks if he's succeeding, and she says no and tells him that he's not coming home, but he insists that he actually is. He explains to her that he has passed the point of no return, and he asks her if she knows what that means, and he mansplains that passing the point of no return is the point in a journey where it would be longer to go back to the beginning than it would be to carry on until the end. In aviation, this is specifically called the point of safe return, or the PSR. It's the point on a flight where a plane no longer has enough fuel to return to its departure airfield and must continue to its destination. And there is a definitive total shift that has happened here. Like I mentioned, with him killing Nick, it's like he's fully embracing being an unhinged psychopath, even though he doesn't really believe anything he's doing is unjustified. Also, I want to point out that I am a member of a few movie fan groups on Facebook where people just talk about movies and that they enjoy and whatnot. They'll just randomly post. And I saw someone post a thread about the William Bill Defense character Bill Foster character in this film, and they were proclaiming that they consider him to be the hero of the movie and not the villain. And I know 100% what they're trying to suggest, that they believe his actions in the movie are justifiable in some way. And that's also the entire point of this movie, that he's doing these things, and although he encounters some fairly bad people along the way, he is also a bad guy. The director, Joel Schumacher, has stated that Bill is a tragic figure, not a hero. The film is meant to be a cautionary tale about how losing your job and your place in the world can turn a normal person into a monster. Bill also further articulates his explanation of being past the point of no return by asking her if she remembers when those astronauts were on the way to the moon and something went wrong, and he points out that they were past the point of no return, and so they had to keep going on their course so that they could actually get back. And he's talking about Apollo 13, the story of which was made into a movie that was called Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton, and I covered it earlier this season, so go back and check that one out. But Bill's whole demeanor is so eerie and creepy now, whereas before his vibe was more disgruntled, angry office worker seeming, and at this point she lies to him and tells him that the police are there right now. But he says that this line in response about how in some countries it's still legal to kill your wife if she insults her, and he also calls her bluff by telling her to put one of the officers on the phone if they're really there, and she just hangs up on him. Martin and Sandra go and visit the Korean convenience store owner, Mr. Lee, but as Martin gets out of his car, he notices a familiar billboard, and he realizes it's the same one he saw that morning during the traffic jam, and he realizes that it might have been the same guy who abandoned his car on the freeway and just walked away. And he even remembers seeing Bill's vanity license plate that said defense on it. We get a quick shot of the police arriving at Beth's house and her seemingly going outside to greet them, and it's just a female police officer. Like it's just one officer this time. Bill is now in an all-black suit, and he got that one from the surplus store, and he walks through a traffic backup that comes as a result of road construction again, and he goes to cut through the construction zone on foot, but one of the construction workers stops him, tells him he can't go through that way, and Bill asks what they're even doing to the street, and the guy tells him that they're fixing it, and Bill says that it was fine 2 days ago, and he tells the construction worker that their presence there and what they're doing in general is total bullshit, and he proclaims that he knows how it works, and he says that they're just trying to justify their inflated budget by spending money on things that they don't need in order to get the same amount of money the next year. This is a common political theory called use it or lose it budgeting. In many government agencies, if you don't spend your entire allocated budget for the year, it's reduced to that amount for the following year. This often leads to unnecessary busy work projects at the end of a fiscal cycle. But as the construction worker tries to tell Bill to eat shit, Bill reveals the pistol tucked in his waistband, and the guy realizes that he doesn't want to get shot and finally backs down and tells Bill what he wants to hear. And then he declares that he'll give the guy something to fix, and he pulls Nick's bazooka out of his gym bag, and the guy runs off. And this is the weirdest moment. So we get this weird fucking scene where Bill is trying to figure out how to operate this bazooka, and just seemingly out of nowhere, like we don't see them approaching. All of a sudden, it's like he's looking at this bazooka, trying to figure out how to operate it, and a random group of kids come up and walk him, like one of them walks him through what he needs to do to make this fucking thing work. And he asks the kid how he knows so much about it. And the kid just says that he learned about it on TV. And the kid asks him what movie he's making. Bill lies and tells him the movie is called Under Construction. But as he's trying to figure out how to shoot the weapon, he accidentally fires it into the long underground trench in the road where the construction worker was before that has metal plates covering it. And he causes an explosion in the distance, and he seems really bothered by the fact that the kids think that the explosion is really cool. The explosion Bill causes is meant to show his lack of control. He didn't even mean to fire it. He's just a pissed off guy playing with tools he doesn't understand, which makes him more dangerous than a calculating criminal. Martin and Sandra track down Bill's home using his license plate, and he lives with his mother. When she answers the door, she threatens to set the dog on them, but when they reveal that they're police, she lets them in and reveals that her dog is dead, and she was bluffing about that whole thing. His mother is played by actress Lois Smith, who also plays Helen Hunt's aunt in the movie Twister. She asks them if they have a warrant to be in there, as Martin freely starts just poking around like an asshole, and Sandra explains to her that the mother, like, she invited them in. Like, you don't need a warrant if the people, when you knock on their door, let you into their house. But the mom tells her that now she's inviting them out, and Sandra asks her if her son William has any other place he would call home, and she says no. Martin basically tries to ease into their conversation by asking her about her glass figurines that are on this display shelving unit in her living room. And this mom is completely fucking nuts, by the way. We see Bill walking by a country club golf course, and he climbs over the fence where it says members only, no trespassing. He cuts across the course and is walking up the fairway of one of the holes where two older members are playing, and one of them, who is named Frank, gets very irritated with him for being on the course and in the way so he can't take his shot. Frank starts yelling at him, and the other guy pleads with him that he doesn't like the looks of Bill. Like, he seems like he's kind of a fucking lunatic. Like, he looks like he's a person who wants to look like he's military but isn't, and that's like one of the top 5 most terrifying types of people. But he thinks that maybe the other guy should just, like, he just thinks that Frank should not instigate anything. But because Frank has a really short fuse, seemingly, and decides to go from 0 to 100 on Bill in such a hurry, he decides that it'd be a good idea to just go ahead and hit a ball at him. And when he does, Bill has to duck to make it miss him, and he immediately pulls out a shotgun from his bag and angrily confronts the golfer, and he's like, fine. And Bill proclaims that the land the golf course is on should have been used for a playground for children, and that there should be a petting zoo or something. Then he fires a shot at their golf cart that somehow sends it rolling down the hill. And it seems like all of this excitement has the angry guy, Frank, experiencing a heart attack at the shock of it all, and his friend is very worried for his well-being and goes chasing after the cart. As the guy lies on the ground suffering, he pleads with Bill to get him his pills from the cart, which is what the friend was going after. But Bill doesn't care, and he uses it as an opportunity to teach the guy a lesson. Bill's mother shows Martin and Sandra Bill's room, and she explains to them that Bill works at a place called NoTech, which is some kind of defense plant. She says he builds important things there to protect everyone from the communists. NoTech is a fake company name, like a play on literally no tech or low tech. The mother's mention of communists shows that she's still living in the mindset of the Cold War, which officially ended with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, just 2 years prior to the film's release. Martin tells Sandra to call the plant to see if they can find anything out about it, or about Bill. The mom tells Martin about how crazy her son's been acting, and how he just generally makes her very nervous and she's very intimidated by him. She even insists that Martin eventually talks to Bill, or that if Martin eventually talks to Bill, that he not mention she said any of this, which is great. Martin asks if by going home he might have meant where his ex-wife and child live, but she says she doesn't know where they live because her son blames her for his split with his ex, so she doesn't even have a relationship with her grandchild or anything. Sandra comes back inside the house from calling No-Tech and reveals that Bill was fired from there over a month ago, and the mother nervously asks where he would be going every day and where he's been eating his lunch. And it's like the thing she's most confused about and most concerned about is that he's clearly been eating his lunch every day. How could he have just been leaving here and eating his lunch anywhere but work? The revelation that he's been pretending to go to work for a month is a classic sign of job loss grief. Many people who are laid off after long tenures feel such shame that they continue their morning routine to avoid admitting failure to their families. We see that Bill is making his way onto a yard for a house on the perimeter of the golf course property, but it pisses him off because they have barbed wire on their fence and he cuts his hand on it. He goes to yell at the family hanging out by the pool for it, but it's not the family that actually lives there. It's the caretaker and his wife and 2 young daughters there having like a barbecue without permission. The caretaker assumes Bill works for a security company because of what he's wearing, and he pleads with him not to tell anybody. But now we can hear sirens nearby because it's probably a safe assumption that someone called the cops on Bill for what he did on the golf course. Bill grabs one of the daughters by the hand and leads them up to a concealed area closer to the house. And Bill asks about what the people do that could afford such a nice ginormous house like this, and the caretaker explains that the person is a plastic surgeon, and Bill's so disgusted by that being the case. But because Bill is so unaware of what a lunatic he looks like and sounds like, he doesn't put it together how terrified this family is that he intends to they are positive he wants to do something to them or use them as hostages or harm them in some way, even though it doesn't seem like he intends to do anything to him or to them. And he just starts asking them about the people, and he goes off on this little tangent, and it's kind of weird for them. He also talks to them a little bit about losing his job, and he believes that he's just overeducated and that has something to do with why he got fired. But after a moment, he looks down and sees that the daughter whose hand he's holding has blood all over her hand, and he lets her go and apologizes profusely to her because he thought he cut her by accident. But the caretaker dad explains to him that it's actually blood from Bill's hand from when he cut his hand climbing over the barbed wire fence. The caretaker pleads with him to leave his family be and take just him if he must, but Bill is offended by this as he had no intention of harming anyone in his family or taking anyone hostage. But he clearly just has no self-awareness of how this all would appear to these people, regardless of whether or not Bill has his own family. That doesn't mean he couldn't possibly be there to harm them. This scene highlights Bill's narcissistic entitlement. He's so focused on his own narrative that he's just some good guy going home to his daughter that he's completely blind to the fact that he is a blood-covered man with a gun that is terrifying this family. Bill basically gets carried away explaining how he's trying to get home for his daughter's birthday. He even gets into describing what all he was going to do with his family when he got there. And by the end, he's getting very emotional about it. And it cuts to the officer who's already leaving Beth's house. It's just this female officeress, if you will, dismissively telling her that it doesn't take somebody all day to drive from Pasadena to Venice, which is what the officer is assuming is happening. Nobody thinks Bill is just walking, but that's what he's doing. And the officer seemed to think that the ex-husband was just trying to get a rise out of Beth, and nothing he did constituted a threat. But Beth pleads with this officer not to leave, and the officer just tells her that if she wants to feel safer, the next time she's voting and she sees something about cutting the number of patrol cars on the street, that she should vote no. Martin and Sandra get wind of what happened at the surplus store and explain that the owner was found murdered and stuffed in a display case, and this of course terrifies Sandra even more because she was literally there. door, and she realizes that. Afterward, Beth is inside with Adele on the couch, and the phone rings, and when she goes to answer it, of course it's Bill, and he points out that they turned their local ice cream parlor into some kind of new age shop. But when Beth hears this, she hangs up on him because evidently she realizes this means he must be very close by. New Age was a massive cultural trend in the early 90s, focusing on crystals, meditation, and alternative spirituality. For a rigid guy like Bill, this shift represents the LA that he knew being replaced by something that he finds ridiculous. And honestly, I think the whole fucking crystal thing is like, it is for me, if I'm like, I've been on like dating sites recently, and when I'm looking at profiles and somebody is like labeled their religious beliefs as spiritual and they're like into this kind of shit, I immediately am just like, I don't think I'm going to mesh well with this person. Beth rushes to leave the house with Adele before Bill can get there, and Bill begins sprinting in the direction of the house from the gift shop payphone. He rushes in the front door as Beth and Adele are sneaking out the side fence gate, and he doesn't notice them. But he quickly comes back outside after realizing they're not in the house, and he looks around in frustration, not knowing where they went. Martin and Sandra hear about what happened on the golf course and realize Bill is now in an all-black surplus outfit. Sandra also finds out where Bill's ex-wife Beth is now living in Venice, and they head that way. Bill is still sitting at Beth's house and watching old home videos. The phone begins ringing and he ignores it as he continues watching the videos, and it's just Martin trying to call the house to see if Beth is there to warn her to get out. And honestly, like, I will say, okay, so I couldn't remember how this movie ended because it'd been a while since I watched it, but like, it annoys me so much that Beth waited until the guy who had all day been calling her randomly and clearly getting closer to her location and was saying he was coming in her direction. She waited until now, like until she realized he was like a block away to leave the house to get somewhere safe. Like, you fucking leave and you go and you find someone to be safe with. But just as Martin hangs up from calling Beth's house, the phone rings again and Sandra answers it for him, but it's Martin's wife Amanda, who is also a lunatic, as I might have mentioned, and she flips out because she's a jealous maniac and clearly doesn't like Sandra because she's jealous, and Sandra nervously hands the phone to Martin, and Amanda begins complaining about whatever stupid bullshit she wants to complain to him about, and Martin finally shuts her down by telling her to shut up and that he'll be home when he's ready, or when he's home. He'll be home when he's home, and she's to have dinner ready for him. But after he finally lets her go, and he and Sandra head to leave to go to Beth's house, the whole station yells out surprise and stops Martin and puts a party hat on him. By the way, the vibes of the people, like everybody that we've met for the most part, other than Sandra and that Detective Brian guy, seem like they are not fans of Martin. And I don't understand, like, if Sandra didn't set up this surprise party, who the fuck would go to the trouble of setting all this shit up for Martin for no more than anybody seems to like him? He tries to stop them from getting carried away celebrating so he can actually leave like he was going to, but they bring out a stripper and he finally tells them he has to go, and one of them makes a wisecrack asking if he's afraid of women too. Like, they've been joking with him that he's afraid of the streets and that's why he's got a desk job now. And Detective Lydecker chimes in and says, "Have you met his wife?" And when Martin calls him on it and asks him what he said, Lydecker won't fess up to it, and Sandra tells him that they have to go. So Martin just punches Lydecker in the face and causes him to fall back on the retirement cake. Martin's punch is his own version of Bill's snapping. The difference is that Martin directs his violence at a person who actually deserved it, the bully Lydecker, rather than innocent bystanders or store clerks who are just, basically NPCs in his world. Bill is still watching videos at Beth's house, and although they seem to have been pleasant thus far and just featured a lot of happy memories, we see one where Bill gets extremely agitated with Beth and Adele over something very small, like he buys Adele a rocking horse or something, and she doesn't like it, and he is just a complete dick about it. Like, he wants to force her to ride it when she's very upset about it. And as Bill is watching the video, he's visibly bothered, but it's not clear if he actually realizes what bad behaviors he's exhibited in the past. But watching the video makes him realize where they might be, because he mentions the him in the video mentions that Adele's favorite place is the pier nearby, and he looks out the window at it, and then he notices that Martin and Sandra are arriving in their car and walking up to the front of the house. Sandra goes around the back and leaves Martin in front, and she almost immediately yells freeze, and we hear a gunshot, and Martin snaps into action to see what just happened. He finds Sandra lying in the backyard with a gunshot wound to her hip and just checks to make sure she's okay, and he tells the neighbors to call an ambulance. A gunshot to the hip/pelvis is extremely painful and often results in a shattered bone that requires a long recovery. However, it's a safe place to shoot a character in a movie if you want them to be out of the fight but survive the film. Martin runs after Bill, who is, of course, making his way to the pier because I guess Beth thought that it made sense to go somewhere that you're basically trapped once you get there while she's running from her deranged, violent ex. I mean, it's like it's a pier. It literally just goes out and ends, and there's no other outlet other than to go back the way you came, which is where Bill would be coming from. So, as Bill is approaching Beth and Adele while they're getting food at a concession stand at the end of the pier, Adele yells out "Daddy" when she spots him because she has no idea what's going on. And honestly, this is the most unsettling and unpleasant moment of the movie where Bill quite forcefully kisses and hugs Beth when he sees her, and she asks him to just leave them alone, and he asks her if he's not allowed to talk to his wife, and she reminds him that she's not his wife anymore. But he explains that they said until death do them part, and he creepily kisses the side of her face and neck. Then he proceeds to pull out a gun and waves it around as the other people nearby flee. He crouches down and begins talking to Adele, and Beth pleads with him that he's sick and he needs help, but Bill points out that she should look at the rest of the town and see what sick really is. Then, out of nowhere, Martin appears nearby to chime in. It's like he's just sitting there and he's just gotten a popcorn from the concession stand, and he agrees with Bill by pointing out that he used to fish there, but now the fish aren't even safe to eat. And he says you can't even swim in the water because it'll give you some kind of bacterial infection. In the early 90s, Santa Monica Bay had a serious pollution problem due to urban runoff and sewage spills. Swimming warnings were frequent, and there were genuine concerns about the toxic levels of mercury and bacteria in the local fish, which is what Martin is actually referencing. Bill angrily tells Martin that he's having a private moment with his family and he'd like to be left alone, and he picks up his gun and readies himself. Martin just basically ignores him and says that he's leaving soon. He says he's retiring and moving to Lake Havasu City, like Bill gives a shit. As he basically just carries on, trying to distract Bill, he finds a moment when Bill is looking away to flash his gun to Beth so that she knows he's there to help. Or, possibly kill her mentally unstable ex-husband in front of their only child, whichever opportunity presents itself first. Martin goes on to explain that he had a daughter once too, even though his wife was never cut out for motherhood. He proclaims that she went through all of the trouble and lost her figure just for him because he wanted a kid. But he says that unfortunately his daughter went to bed one night and never woke up. He explains that it's called infant death syndrome, but he says that it was strange because she was 2 years old, so she wasn't an infant. What he's actually referring to is now called sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, and it usually occurs in infants under 1 year old. For a child over 1 year old, it is technically categorized as sudden unexpected death in childhood, or SUDC. Martin's trauma is the quiet version of loss, while Bill's is the loud, destructive version. Martin walks over and gives the popcorn that he has to Adele, which gives him an opportunity to notice Bill's pistol that he's been concealing. But as Adele goes to eat the popcorn, she offers it to her dad, and because Bill's a fucking nut job, he doesn't realize that as he puts down the pistol so he can take the popcorn from her, that's probably not the best idea for him if he wants to be successful here. But a nearby police car makes its siren go bloop. And when Bill looks over at it, Beth kicks his gun away and runs over and then picks it up and throws it into the water. And then she runs off with Adele. Martin pulls his gun on Bill, but Beth stops as she hears Bill crying out and pleading with her to stop, and she only pauses for a moment before she runs away with Adele. Martin asks him what he planned to do, and Bill claims he doesn't know, but Martin says that guys like him always say that they don't know, but it always seems pretty clear that they know what they're going to do, and it seems like he intended to kill his wife and child. And he says it's obvious that once he did that, it would likely be just as easy to turn the gun around on himself. And Martin tells them that he's going to take him to meet some nice policemen, and Bill is confused and asks, "I'm the bad guy?" And Martin just says, "Yes." And this is the most famous line in the movie. It's the epiphany moment where Bill realizes that in his own head, he was a hero fighting for justice, but to the world, he's just a murderer who terrified a city. Then Bill points out that they lied to him because he builds missiles to help protect America, but all of the money goes to people like the plastic surgeon with a nice house by the golf course. Martin frustratedly asks if that's really what this is all about, just him being lied to, and he says that everyone gets lied to, and the only thing that makes Bill special is that little girl. As it's clear that uniformed police officers are closing in, Bill points out to Martin that he has a gun and it's in his pocket. He asks Martin if he wants to draw, and Martin declines and says, "Let's call it a day," but Bill just says on 3, because it's pretty clear that Bill realizes there's really no way out of this situation for him, and he doesn't have any other options other than to just go to prison for a very long time. And when he finishes his count, he goes for his pocket where the gun supposedly is, and Martin shoots him, and Bill falls back against the railing behind him, and we see that he's only holding Adele's water pistol, and he just says to Martin, "I could have got you," and falls back dead into the water below. This is a suicide by cop scenario. Bill knew Martin wouldn't let him draw, and by using a toy gun he insured, he would be killed without actually harming Martin. It also means Bill's life insurance might still pay out to his daughter, as he didn't technically commit suicide, even though I would say that's less and less likely over time with insurance companies. Afterward, the captain is being interviewed by reporters, and he falsely sings the praises of Martin's heroics. But as Martin is walking by and they ask him to comment after he's just heard the captain saying this, he just says, "Fuck you, Captain Yardley. Fuck you very much." He sees Sandra being loaded onto a stretcher at Beth's house and tells her he'll see her at the hospital, and then he sees Beth sitting on the front porch with Adele, and she reveals that she hasn't actually told Adele what happened to Bill, and she realizes that it's Adele's birthday party that's supposed to be happening today, and it's supposedly still going to happen, and Martin advises that she just wait to tell Adele until the next day so that she can have her fun, you know? He sits down next to Adele, and he finds out her name, and he tells her that his name is Mud, and she shakes her head in disbelief. And he says that his name will be Mud when when his wife finds out that he's still a cop, because he's clearly not retiring now. The phrase, "his name is Mud," dates back to at least the early 19th century, meaning to be in disgrace or trouble. A popular but incorrect legend says that it comes from Dr. Samuel Mudd, who treated John Wilkes Booth, but the term was in use long before the Lincoln assassination. The camera moves inside and shows that the home videos are still playing on the TV, and we see a seemingly happy Bill with his wife and kid, and then it cuts to black and we roll credits. Okay, so trivia for this movie. Every studio in Hollywood turned down Eb Rose Smith's script for this movie. Producer Arnold Copelson was getting to the stage of considering cable television when Michael Douglas came across the script and pronounced it as one of the best he'd ever read. During the whammy burger scene, Dee Dee Pfeiffer as Sheila had a hard time staying in character after Bill pulls out his firearm, as his lines afterward kept making her giggle and laugh. If one looks closely at her face as she's handing Rick the burger before the camera pans to Bill talking to the scared customers, you can see that she's smiling. The man who is yelling about being not economically viable in front of the bank is wearing the same clothes as Bill. Even the tie pattern is the same. Detective Brian, who is played by Steve Park, says that he can't translate for Mr. Lee, played by Michael Paul Chan, because he is Japanese and Mr. Lee is Korean. In real life, Park is South Korean and Chan is Chinese. The movie was being shot on locations in Linwood, California when the 1992 Los Angeles riots began. By April 30th, the riots were sufficiently disruptive to force filming to stop early that day. Film crews produced more footage inside of Warner Brothers' studio in Burbank as the riots continued. By May 4th, when the crew intended to resume in Pasadena, initial requests to do so were denied, causing delays. The tension around the riots was something that the filmmakers deemed to have an effect on the finished film. The opening sequence of the film, in which Bill is stuck in traffic, is a direct homage to Federico Fellini. Wow, Federico Fellini's famous opening to 8.5 from 1963, which is a movie, by the way. Joel Schumacher envisioned his friend Michael Douglas in the lead role. However, Douglas planned to take a break from acting at this time, as he had just done 2 films back to back, and he desired to spend more time with his family. Douglas agreed to read the script after Schumacher urged him to do so, and declared it to be one of the best he'd ever read, as I already mentioned, and he took the role. The presence of such a popular actor as the lead allowed the film to get a much higher budget. Douglas, believing the film to be important, agreed to take a much lower salary for the film so that it could afford to have more money to get the film made. IMDb nuggets. Although screen legends Michael Douglas and Robert Duvall are the leads of the film, they don't appear together until near the end of the film. Yeah, that's not interesting, and that's not worth submitting to IMDb trivia, by the way. Opening weekend, or no, wait, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. On to info and ratings. Opening weekend, 8.7 million. Worldwide gross, 40.9 million. IMDb rating, 7.5. Letterboxd rating, 3.7. Rotten Tomato critics score, 75%. Rotten Tomato audience score, 84%. Personal rating, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Praise for this movie. I do enjoy how thought-provoking the events of this movie are. This is one of my favorite Michael Douglas performances, and Robert Duvall is pretty solid here as well, as he frequently is. Despite being fairly cheesy writing-wise at times, I do find movies like this very interesting to watch, and often more enjoyable than others that are well regarded for awards and stuff. I would just say that aside from the 2 actors I just mentioned, most everybody else in the cast kind of turns in a pretty mediocre performance, and the writing is not great, like I kind of mentioned just now. All right, everyone, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
I'm here to welcome you